Hey, Wes.
Hey, Jeremy. We're actually live right now. So
Yeah, well,
we've got about 75 people joined so far. So I think a few more will be continuing to join us, but we're right at 1 o'clock. So thank you to everybody for joining us. I'm about to pass it over to Jeremiah. But if you will, please put in the chat box your name, what organization you're representing, and where in the world you're joining us from today. So please make sure to put that in the chat box. Want to see everybody who's here and give you a chance to get to know each other as well. So thank you for being on here.
thank you, Wes. Yeah, go ahead. That chat box, if you're on your computer, it's at the bottom. Hopefully, we've been at this a year now using virtual platforms. So hopefully, we've got a little experience in it. I feel like we hit a hurdle almost every day. So, all right. I'm seeing some familiar names on here. Yep, Arkansas, Illinois, Paris, France. All right. All right, we'll go ahead and get going. I think we've got quite a few attendees on now. Well, hey, like Wes said, we really are grateful that you're logging on and spending an hour with us today on this topic. We have a huge heart for coaching, and this specific topic is a crucial one for breaking the ice with coaching. So I'm going to introduce Wes Martin in a little bit, but as we get started, this is the first webinar we've done in 2021. If some of you remember last year, at the beginning of COVID, we decided to start launching some webinars just so we can get some free content out for our friends out there to support you. We're going to do the same thing this year. So we're going to continually do these webinars as 2021 continues on. The heart of that is really this idea of learning, learning in community, learning with you, and just doing life together. These webinars are going to be, the topic is going to be coaching. That's something that we love at Strata. And so as we set the stage, as you enter into these webinars, know that that's most likely going to be the topic. Again, later in the webinar, you're going to see that this year we've decided to not be quite as formal. So Wes and I are actually going to have a conversation on the back end of this webinar, and you're going to have a chance to ask questions and engage in that conversation. We really hope you do. I'm a verbal processor, and so I love conversation around this topic. Nathan's going to break the ice for us, like I said, and get this going as he really lays out clear expectations on what coaching is, and also just his expert insights on that. So let me introduce Nathan. Some of you may know him, some of you may not know him, but we are Strata Leadership. We're here based out of Oklahoma City. We're an organizational development firm specializing in specifically leadership development and executive coaching. That is where our heart's at. We love helping elevate life for our clients and the people out there really doing some hard work. So our job is to come alongside you and support you. So Dr. Nathan Mellor is our CEO and owner of Strata Leadership. He's been doing this a long time. I won't even go there. So, but Nathan has a genuine heart. He does have all the accolades and letters behind his name, but more importantly, if you get to know Nathan, he does this because he believes that this type of work changes lives and has the biggest impact to our world right now. If it wasn't for that, Nathan wouldn't do it. Nathan is genuine, and he is an excellent leader as he comes alongside other leaders and helps coach them as an executive coach specifically. So Nathan, I'm going to pass it off to you. Appreciate you doing this today, and love seeing everybody, even though some of us are still quarantined. So.
Well, thank you, Jeremiah. And I'm extremely grateful to be on a team with people like Jeremiah and Wes. And we've got just some incredible people who are a part of the team. And so thank you for that introduction. Today, we're going to be focusing in on something that I hope is helpful to you on a personal level, and then could also be helpful to you as you are trying to help other people. And so a lot of the discussion that we're going to be having today really comes from some of the insights and research from Dr. Richard Boyatzis. So Dr. Richard Boyatzis, who is up at Case Western, was the person behind a lot of what would be later become known as emotional intelligence. And then he began to focus in on more of the process by which we make decisions and how we look at the future, the process by which our brains respond to opportunities. And his concept became known as the intentional change theory, or ICF, intentional change theory. And the concept is really pretty straightforward. Imagine you're going to the doctor, and the doctor says to you, hey, Nathan, it looks like you've gained a few pounds over this quarantine and this time that you've been at home and all of that. And I tell you, looking at your chart here, we've got some concerns based upon your family history, based upon different things. And Nathan, I got to tell you right now, you need to lose 30 pounds or you're going to have a negative health consequence. You might even have a heart attack. Well, Dr. Boyatzis began to study that, to look at what was happening in people's brains when they were prompted to make a decision about the future based upon a negative driver. And then to look at people's brains as they were processing things that were not negative. And the question might have been very similar, or the observation might have been very similar, but it was formed in a different structure that sounded more like this. Nathan, I know that the quarantine has been a challenging time for us all. Help me understand some of your goals for the future. Tell me about your ideal weight. Tell me about your ideal fitness level, your ideal health. Help me understand what you would like to accomplish. And what they began noticing is when I am looking to the future and I'm asked a question like that one, a different part of the brain lights up than when I'm dealing with a negative. So when you're telling me something that might be negative, that is meant to prompt me, but it might not sustain me. And so what will happen is if someone is told, if you don't lose this weight, you'll have this negative health consequence, they might lose the weight initially, let's say, but they are unlikely to keep it off. Versus going towards the positive. Now, when we're dealing with the negative emotional attractor, that part of the brain is kicking in, the NEA, the negative emotional attractor. And so I will resist something, but over time, I start to fade back into what I had been doing before. Versus the positive, which is the positive emotional attractor, the PEA. And the PEA is what allows us to experience change when we are not being coached for compliance. We're being coached for compassion. Tell me about the life you'd really like to have. Tell me about where you would like to go from here. And that's where I want to go with you today. And I want to tell you why. I want to tell you why we're taking this approach, because you looking at what is not working may prompt change. But what I want to do is to help you imagine what you are wanting to accomplish so that there's a game plan that can emerge, a process that can emerge that will allow you to pursue who you really want to be. Not who I want you to be or someone else may want you to be, but who you really want to be when you are thinking about the ideal version of you. Now, I like to ask people about their dream when they think about the future. And I'd love to say, tell me about the ideal version of you a year from now, or maybe 3 years from now, 5, as long as the runway is we would like for it to be. Sometimes having the runway a little bit farther out takes some of the stress away of having to do all that tomorrow, but it gives you a sense of where you're trying to go. And the reason I ask people to tell me about the ideal version of themselves is because I'm wanting them in coaching to think about the future much more than the present or the past. Tell me about who you want to become. And so I'm asking someone, tell me about the ideal version of themselves. And this is very different, in my opinion, from the idea of tell me about the best version of yourself. Because sometimes the best version of yourself is actually past tense. You're comparing yourself with a version of yourself in the past, which is not where I want to go. I want you to look at where you are now, where you want to go in the future. And I want you to look at this idea of what is the ideal version of you, where you are, and where you want to be in the future. Let's think about this. You're in a meeting. Tell me about the ideal version of you in a meeting as a participant. So if you are at your ideal, what does that look like? Are you taking notes? Are you sitting up? Are you attentive? So if I can imagine the ideal version of myself in that meeting as a participant, I can see it. Now let's go a little bit farther. You are leading the meeting. Tell me about the ideal version of you leading the meeting. Well, I'm prepared. I'm engaged. I'm listening. I'm being attentive. And then I say, well, tell me about the ideal version of you at work. Well, I'm focused. I'm centered. I have clarity. And so I'm asking you to contemplate that, because when you can think about the ideal version of yourself, then we start looking at, what do I need to prioritize? What do I need to start doing? What do I need to stop doing to be able to start making my way towards that idea? But I'll tell you right now, that discussion is a tough one, especially right now, because your brain is an amazing thing. But your brain does not want to expend any more energy than what is completely required. Our brains take up a lot of energy, and so our brains do not want to do things that require us to think more deeply than we have to. And so we look for solutions as quickly as possible to get on with it. And so when people start asking you to think about the future, to think about your future, I find that you will be open to that question largely based upon the level of stress that you feel right now. Someone that is feeling like they are drowning right now, a question about the future, about what you're going to do a month from now or a year from now, is not only not productive, it's probably irritating. When you feel like you're drowning in work, you feel like everything is on you right now, me saying, hey, let's talk about your future, is not going to be an easy conversation unless you find yourself getting to that spot and saying, okay, let me try. And so I'm going to ask you to do that. I'm going to ask you to allow our time right now to be an oasis for you. I want you to just to take a moment. Now, the brain can reset itself pretty well if you will stop for a minute and breathe. So as you're processing this, I want you to think about this. I want you to breathe in and out, to focus, to breathe in and out. And now I want us to create this oasis where you can think. And I want you to imagine right now, I want you to feel where you are currently. I want you to feel your surroundings, but I want you to imagine a time in your life when it was working well. I want you to focus on a time in your professional life when you just had a great day. You were at your peak performance. I want you to think of that time in your life when you were at peak performance, where things were going really, really well. And I want you to imagine that moment in your mind. Maybe it was a big deal a big deal moment where everybody was there, or maybe it was a small thing. But I want you to imagine yourself in that moment. I want you to look around in that moment to see who's there with you. I want you to see who's in that environment, that preferred environment, and look around who's there with you. What are you hearing? What are you seeing? What are you feeling? I want you to get to that spot when you've been there before, when you're at peak performance, when it's working. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to see in your mind's eye an image, a metaphor, a phrase, something that captures the essence of you in that moment. I want you to have an image in your mind's eye of that moment. I want you to see that in your mind's eye. That kind of sums up, it captures the essence of you at your best. I want you to imagine that for a minute. And And I want you to imagine you've been living at that peak performance for a year. And you have run into a friend of yours that you haven't seen in a while, and you start a conversation with them, and you're talking about life, and they are saying, so what's going on in your life? And you start telling them about what your life has been like by living at the peak performance level for the past year. What would you tell them? What would you celebrate? What would you tell them about how you felt? So I want you to feel this. I want you to feel what it would be like to have that kind of conversation a year from now. And you're telling them about what you have been focused on, what you're not doing, those types of things. What is different about your life a year from now than it is today? Living at a peak performance for an entire year. Can you see it? Can you imagine that conversation? Now let's fast forward a little bit more. We go ahead a little bit more. Now we're at 5 years. You've been living at peak performance for 5 years. And we run into each other and you start telling me about what you've been accomplishing, what you've been doing, how you've been investing your life. What would you tell me about? What would you tell me would be the most important things that you've learned, observed? Where did you invest your time? And so when you're thinking about this, what I want you to be able to do is to envision you using what you've already done before to help you visualize what you would like to do in your preferred environment in the future. Then I want you to say, okay, if I want to live like this more. I was talking to a dear friend of mine the other day, and he said, I was out with my family, and we went to go to this restaurant as a family. We got our meals. We're all sitting there together, socially distanced. And he said it was one of those perfect moments. And I thought to myself, wow, I wish I could have more moments like these. So let's talk about your life. Let's think about it. You living at peak performance. Tell me about the ideal version of you at home. Tell me about the ideal version of you financially, spiritually, emotionally. Because here's what happens. At some point in your life, you come to this moment, or you don't. But you will come to this moment, hopefully, when you recognize that you are responsible for your life. And it is so easy for you to choose to live the life that somebody else had in mind for you. And I would ask you to recognize that it is your responsibility to decide, and it can only be your responsibility, really, to decide how to invest your life. And by doing that, you start adding value to it. Because you're looking at your life and you're living in alignment. I am pretty confident that my grandfather did not dream of the job that he had. Granddad, when he came back from World War II, he was put in a difficult spot because what he wanted to do was not a job that was available for him to do. He had wanted to be a mechanic or a machinist. They came back from the war and we had mechanics and machinists aplenty. So he looked for the best job he could find. And so he became a mail carrier. He was a letter carrier, and he would carry that mail on his back day after day for 3 decades. Now I look at him and I think, okay, this is someone who did not necessarily have a job that he loved, but he translated that the work that he was doing connected to the people that he loved. So the job that he had, he may not have loved, but he did that job because of the people that he loved, because he wanted to be a provider. So you'd carry the mail all day long, every day walking mile after mile. And then he would do other jobs. He was a janitor at the local bank. He was the janitor at the local church. And so what he came to the realization of was that he was not going to get the type of job that was going to provide in incredible ways for him financially. So he looked at his life and he said, but this is in alignment with who I want to be. And he came to this conclusion: my title does not define me. The way I do my job does. And what did he have? The ideal version of him. And what a legacy. Actually, just last week, it was one of the coldest days, if not the coldest days in the history of Oklahoma, where I live and where this program's coming from today. It got incredibly cold, and some parts of the world, they're accustomed to that. Their buildings and their infrastructures are made for that. But the wind chill was -30. And it was bitterly cold, and it was snowing and snowing some more and snowing some more. And I got a text from my dad, and he gave me a picture of the snow where he was, and I texted him back and I said, "Do you think Granddad would be delivering the mail today?" He responded back instantly, "Absolutely," because he took pride in his work, because he knew who he wanted to be. And it's amazing what you can do when you know that. So I'd ask you this question as we consider this conversation today. In a coaching environment, one of the first things that you're trying to do is you're trying to help people think about the future, recognizing that thinking about the future can be challenging when you feel stuck in the present. It was described to me once as your brain is a lot like having a gear shift in a car, and that gear shifter can be in one gear or another. And so if you look at your brain, it's kind of like that. That gear shifter can be in survival mode or it can be in creative mode, but it can't be in both at the same time. So what happens when I am in survival mode? It is very difficult for me to think about who I want to be. But if I am willing to try, if I'm willing to allow myself to be pushed, I can take that gear shift from survival to thriving to creative by engaging the executive function of my brain. And that's one of the consequences of being in this challenging time, is that executives specifically, leaders specifically, are having a harder time with being empathetic and being able to access the executive function of their brain, which is what is needed for us to think more deeply, to not just be responding off of impulse, but to think more deeply, to go to that system 2 thinking versus just the system 1 response. And so I'd ask you the question, when you think about your future, tell me about that future. What would life be like if you had a year of your life in which you were pursuing the ideal? Now, hear me out. I'm not talking about something other than you reaching your potential, you maximizing your life, you squeezing every ounce of life out of that moment. And you might hear me saying, well, he's saying you could just be successful if you do this, this, and this. Hear me out. I'm not even defining success. I'm asking you to define success. Because how many people do we know who pursued the success that other people had in mind, and they got it, and then they regretted it? I've got two daughters, one that's in college and one that's about to go. We're going to go over to her college soon because they have a big interview process, and it'll be next week. And they're going to ask her a question that she will be asked 1,000 times over the next year or so. They're going to ask her the question that we ask 18-year-olds. And we say this: so what are you going to study? What do you want to do? Who do you want to be? And there are some 18-year-olds who know, but most don't. And what I find is that that's one of the best questions in the world and we stop asking it when we might have a pretty good idea of how to answer it. So tell me about the ideal version of you. Give me a little timeline here. Let's look at where you are and where you want to be. Then let's start looking at what would you have to do? What's the smallest thing you could do to take a step forward? I create a context in which I'm around people who want to see me succeed. I'm creating momentum. And this is the thing I'll finish with. I think it's interesting. They did a study a number of years ago about people who were struggling with emotional distress. And they were looking at how do people respond to different things like that. And what they found was that when people made an appointment to see a therapist, just making the appointment often made people feel better because they were taking an action step closer to who they wanted to be. And right now, today, it's the same thing. I would ask you, what is a decision that you need to make, an action step you take right now to help you not feel like you are just being crushed by life, but to say, okay, we're going to start going the other direction. I'm going to go to that meeting today, and I'm going to be the ideal version of me. I'm going to greet people. I'm going to let them know that I'm glad that they're there. I'm going to do what? Small actions matter. I'm so glad that you're here today. I'm going to pass it back to Wes and Jeremiah. I will stay on here as well, but I want to say that Wes and Jeremiah are trained coaches who are passionate about this content as well. And so we will look forward to responding to your questions as you are asking them. I see some questions are coming up, and then some of you have already been putting some things in the chat. Wes, let me give this back to you, and I will look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you, Nathan. Jeremiah, did you want to set some of the stage for what the rest of our time is going to look like?
Absolutely. So it is almost 1:30. So what we'll do is spend really just the next 20 minutes diving into some things that stuck out to you and I, Wes, as we answer the questions too. I don't know what the audience, how they learn. I know for me, and I'll interject my bias here of I'll listen to something as a leader and it sparks so many thoughts and floats so many things and questions up to the surface. But then what do I do with that? And so then that's where the conversation, as we dive in together, hopefully we can build some models around this where we can really understand this even further. And so that's what I hope the next 30 minutes does for all of us as we get to dive in and learn together. So Wes, I'm going to let you lead this part, and I can't wait to tag team this with you.
Yeah.
Wes, before you jump in there, I'm sorry for interrupting. I really am. Let me respond to Jill's question, then I'll give it back to you all and let you respond moving forward. Jill asked, would it be helpful to have a journaling activity or something like that? And I would say anything that can help you be reflective tends to be helpful. And so what happens with a lot of leaders is that they will remember what did not go well, and they're often not thinking of the things that did go well. And I find that by looking at that, you might say this: what is one thing today that worked really well? What is one thing that I felt like worked well? And then what can I do to become a little bit better at that tomorrow? And you're kind of building on that. And what you'll see is that if you will be reflective with that, if you will capture some of those things, those strengths begin to emerge, and you'll start seeing the things that you can do that might be a bit unique, that you might not have noticed to begin with. And so I would definitely say that that kind of thing is extremely helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And to add to what Nathan's saying there, I think the process that he's outlining is just continuing to refine that vision. So when we're working with coaching clients and we're asking them, what is the ideal version of yourself? Rarely are they able to articulate their vision super clearly in that first session, but just by asking yourself that same question. So what Nathan's referring to there, and Jill, thank you so much for your question. I think the process of self-reflection, of really working through asking yourself that question every single day in your journal, and then just forcing yourself to answer it of what is the ideal version of myself. I think one caveat to add to that is the idea of a vision board, I think, can be really powerful. there's actually quite a bit of research that if we spend so much time dreaming about the future, what we're going to have, maybe you have this vision board and you have the house on the ocean and you've got the car that you want and you have all of that and you're seeing it every day, that power of visualization is really powerful. But what's fascinating is by visualizing that too often, engaging in taking yourself to that space too often, psychologists have found your motivation to accomplish those things actually decreases because there's almost this reward that you're getting as if you've already accomplished this goal. And so what Nathan's saying there at the end of converting that into what are the action steps that I need to take today and what are the habits that I need to form to help me achieve these dreams, but not spending so much time living in that future. Jeremiah, you and I have the privilege of getting to do quite a bit of coaching through Strata leadership. And I'm just curious for you, you know, oftentimes we're beginning our coaching sessions with this idea of really trying to capture what is the ideal version of the coachee, of the client that we're working with. What are some ways that you ask that question and how have you found that to be useful in your coaching practice?
Yeah, it's a fun question to ask because people don't get asked that very often. You'd think that's something we're all talking about is dreams. Hey, what's your dream? The reality is that we're coming out of a season, and I think just the way our world works now is we don't pause as leaders to really think about this and really define this for ourselves. And if you're a great leader, unfortunately, you're usually the one caring for people, and you're the one asking people this. But who's asking you this? And so, within the coaching sessions, it's really exciting to ask that question. One, ask it very often. Ask it many, many times because it sets such a strong foundation and it's something you always come back through. Every conversation that happens in coaching usually comes back to that lens of the vision. And so you're driving the future. Coaching is all about future tense, as we've talked about in some of the webinars in the past. And so you might ask, it might be as simple as, hey, what's your goal today? And the client's coming back with, well, here's the goal. And is that goal tied back to vision? And if not, help them hold that focus and coming back to that topic of who's your ideal self? Here's my favorite question. What do you really want?
Yeah.
What do you really want? And almost annoy them of, no, are you telling me the truth? What do you think bigger? Think bigger. Because so many of us tend as humble leaders to think really small. But let's dream. Let's wipe the board completely clean in this 1 hour session and dream. And let's build a life to that. So
yeah, we've actually gotten a few questions. And so Jeremiah, I want to pose this one to you. It came in anonymously, but it really builds on what you're talking about right there. Do you have any tips for getting past self-imposed limitations on how far we believe we can stretch to achieve our ideal self within our personal reality? Do you have any thoughts as related to, you know, I've got this vision, I've got this dream of my ideal self, of a fulfilling life, of what that peak performance looks like that Nathan was referring to. But then that voice starts to creep into my head of, you can't really do that, or you can't really be that. How do you combat that?
Yeah, I love values and creating values for my life and creating values with an organization and creating values for my kids. And one of the things I always ask my kids of, are you a truth teller? And that starts with self-talk. Are you telling yourself the truth? And what I think what they're getting at too is there's reality and there's the dream. And so many times we get stuck in our reality and say, that's not possible. That's not possible. That's not possible. And so focusing on what is possible and skirting around that and dreaming bigger. And that's what I'm getting back to is there can be a roadblock, but dreaming bigger. Wes, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think definitely that's where coaching is so useful. So this idea of self-coaching, of going through a journal or asking yourself these questions over and over is really powerful. But the coach, one of the values that they bring is that idea of perspective and really challenging beliefs. So a lot of times those self-imposed limitations are built on what Nathan talks about all the time, some of the research of Carol Dweck on a fixed mindset, that I believe that I am this way, that this is deeply ingrained within me. And so, you know, maybe the belief is I'm just not good at business. And so maybe I would love to own my own business and go out on my own. But I've been telling myself this story for a really long time that I'm not good at business. And so then the coach follows up with some questions. What does that mean, not good at business? when did you first start to believe that you weren't good at business, and challenging some of those self-limiting beliefs. So really asking yourself, where do these beliefs come from? And are they rooted in reality? Or was it just that somebody made an offhanded comment in your junior algebra course in high school? And so you've continued to carry this belief about yourself for the rest of your life, even though the things that you've accomplished say that that thing that the algebra teacher said about you may not actually be true. Nathan, did you have any thoughts you wanted to add to the idea of self-limiting beliefs?
Thank you for the question, Ross. And I love what Jeremiah and Wes have already said. A technique that I like to use that was taught to me was to use what's called the miracle question. And this was meant to help people who were stuck with something in the past, that you were trying to help them not dismiss the past, but not to get stuck in it. And so when you look at coaching, it's very different than mentoring or therapy. So when you're looking at most therapists, not all, but most therapists are focused on the past, what has happened in the past and how you're dealing with that. Mentoring is more about a skill set that you're being taught by someone who is dealing with that in the current, they're trying to help you right now. Coaching is really focused on the future. And so the miracle question goes like this. Imagine by some miracle, you wake up tomorrow morning, Ross, and the biggest challenge you are facing right now is gone. It's been taken away. What is different about your life tomorrow if you woke up and that were the case? And what people will start doing is they'll start thinking, okay, well, this, or this, and we start getting some more specifics. But what will happen is that we're trying to give them a reframing moment to get that growth mindset going versus the fixed mindset. The word that I like to use with people is ask them to use the word yet. I'm not good at making presentations yet. I can't play the guitar yet. And to not have themselves get boxed into that one way of thinking. I'm going to step back here. I'm going to keep listening, but I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera off. I've really enjoyed being able to spend time. And Jeremiah and Wes, I'm going to just enjoy listening in because my answers are 3 minutes when they should be 30 seconds. So I'm going to enjoy listening to you all as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you for that insight, Nathan. Jeremiah, we had another question come through the Q&A. Rick Hensley asks, when trying to define who you are and how to improve yourself, is it best to deal with the whole image of yourself or to compartmentalize? I love this question. This is something we get asked about very frequently in a variety of ways, specifically because we're entrenched in this world of executive and leadership coaching. So are we coaching the executive or the leader, or are we coaching the whole person? Jeremiah, what do you have to say to that?
Yeah, this is something I think the entire world of coaching wrestles with on a day-to-day. When we're working with executive leaders, we're focusing on a lot of organizational goals of trying to align and accomplish those organizational goals. While at the same time, the organization hired a person. And we believe that the health of the organization relies on the health of the individual. And the health of the individual cannot be compartmentalized. So I firmly believe as a coach, and I know there are coaches possibly that would disagree with this idea, but you can't compartmentalize these sessions. We have to bring the whole person to the job. If we're asking our employees and our peers to do that, hey, Wes, bring your whole self to Strata because I hired you to be yourself here. And I think the organization values Wes in a way that he brings his whole self, and that's more powerful for us versus compartmentalizing him. So why would I do that in coaching? And so we really try to look at the big picture. Where's this individual wanting to go? And then the actions can be broken down and compartmentalized through that. Wes, do you agree with that? Disagree with that? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think that really goes back to when Nathan's talking about the intentional change theory presented by Richard Boyatzis, that one of the most powerful ideas in there is the ideal self, and then there's the kind of the idea of the real self and circumstances. And so one of the important distinctions to make here is when we're talking about this idea of the ideal version of yourself, or what's your vision for the future? What's a fulfilling life look like for you? we're not just dreaming disconnected from reality. We have to start with this idea of what's the positive vision that we're building to. And then we absolutely bring it back down to what are the realities, what are the limitations, what are the constraints, what are the current circumstances that you're under, and then let's begin making progress towards those things. But in order to do so, before we start dealing with the realities and the self-limiting beliefs and the limitations of our circumstances, we have to craft this compelling vision of the future. And I don't know how we do that if we're not looking at the whole person. So part of our role as a coach is, and it's really fun to watch this, but in that first session, when we're really trying to find out what makes this person come alive, what is the ember? Nathan uses this analogy. What are the embers that are burning down there on the surface that I, as the coach, can come in and fan the flame? And if we can make those embers into a bonfire, then watch out, world, for what the coachee is about to unleash, bringing their strengths and their talents and their personalities and their passions to the workplace. But when we're really looking at those embers, we have to look first at what really makes this person come alive. And those ideas have to be married with the whole person, or we're dealing with a compartmentalized person and we're not getting the whole self of the passion that's coming. So I may ask Jeremiah, and this is a really important distinction when we're talking about what is the ideal version of yourself. If I'm working with Jeremiah as his coach, and I say, Jeremiah, tell me about the ideal version of yourself. Pretty frequently, specifically when we're coaching an executive or a leader within an organization and the organization has paid for them to be there, the first answer that you get is usually a canned answer of who they think their boss wants them to be, who they think their spouse wants them to be, who they think they ought to be, or who they think they should be. And so as the coach, I'm listening to the person answering the question. I'm taking note of the words that they're using, but I'm also taking note of the body language. Is Jeremiah's face lighting up? Is he sitting up taller? Are his shoulders getting more confident? Is he smiling? Is he excited about this ideal version of himself? And if the body language doesn't match the words, then that usually tells me that there's some dissonance between what he's saying and what he's actually feeling. And so as his coach, I'm really finely tuned into that to make sure that we're really capturing what Jeremiah actually wants. Otherwise, I'm going to end up as his leader or as his coach external to the organization. I'm going to end up coaching him for compliance. And we don't coach for compliance, we coach for transformation. So coaching for compliance is this idea that I'm trying to fit Jeremiah into some box that either he thinks he should fit into or his organization thinks he should fit into. And when I'm compartmentalizing him and reducing him down to an employee, he's not able to bring his resonant self and the passion isn't there. But if I can connect Jeremiah as a leader, if I can connect his vision for his life as a leader to his vision of his life as a father, his vision of his life as a husband, his vision of a life as an adventurer and a guy who loves spending time in the mountains, if I can do that, then I begin to create synergy, and then I'm removing the obstacles to motivation. The motivation for him to achieve everything he wants to achieve is already within him. The problem is he's built up these limitations and these obstacles that are keeping him from living into that self. So hopefully that answers that question. But yes, absolutely, dealing with the entire person, what makes them come alive. Otherwise, I'm not getting the real story and I'm not getting the true vision. And the change that's going to end up taking place is going to be built on oughts and shoulds. And he's going to change for a time, but eventually it'll die out because it's not resonating and he's not getting the feedback of living that fulfilled life at peak performance. So thank you so much. I think it was Rick. Thank you so much for that question. We did have a couple other questions come in. I want to address the first one by Stephen Bell. Jeremiah, do you have any recommended books, articles, etc., about self-coaching? I'd love to build up that type of self-reflection.
Well, I love to read. The real winner here is Wes. I can't remember how many books he read last year, and the man retains everything he reads. It just blows my mind. But I do have one book that really I personally enjoy. It is the John Gordon's book, The Power of Positive Leadership. I think it helps you reframe some of the thought patterns. We also talk about mindsets. The book Mindsets by Dr. Carol Dweck talks about really how to lead into that change of some of the thinking, the thought patterns there. So those are my two recommendations, and I'll put those in the chat while Wes kicks off his ideas here.
Yeah, that's really good. Stefan, I don't have any answers off the top of my hat of books that I know that actually walk you through really a self-reflective, self-coaching exercise. They probably exist. I'm just not that familiar with them. But one book I would recommend to you, and I actually see it on Jeremiah's bookshelf behind him, is this one called The Coaching Habit. So this was written by a gentleman named Michael Bungay Stanier. And that book title, again, is The Coaching Habit. He wrote that book specifically for leaders who want to incorporate more coaching into their leadership toolkit. So specifically, he's really looking at micro coaching sessions within an organization, 10 minutes or less. And so that book is just, number one, it's just a great resource for leaders, but it does actually walk through, it's super practical. And the way that the book is outlined is 7 questions, 7 coaching questions. From the kickstart question, which is what's on your mind. The second question he calls the awe question, and one else. And so I think that you could definitely take the questions in that book and then just sitting down with yourself and journaling. And maybe this is geeky and maybe this makes me sound pretty weird, but I talk to myself in the third person pretty often in my journaling sessions. So I sit down in the morning and I journal, usually right before I start my workday. And I'll ask myself a series of questions. So one question that I go back to pretty frequently is, okay, Wes, you've looked at your schedule for the day. What is required of you today? And I'll literally write that out. What is required of you today, Wes? Or Wes, what is required of you today? And then I answer that question back to myself as if I'm just really having this conversation with myself. And so I actually think that that's a really powerful way to have those kind of coaching conversations with yourself. But Stefan, I don't know off the top of my head a really great just self-coaching book. So I apologize for not having that off the top of my head. We have another question from Jill. Jill said, how often do you come back and ask the question to yourself and your clients? I know that my ideal version of myself has changed over time. Jill, that is a really, really insightful question. And I think you're definitely picking up on the trajectory of what we're actually asking here. Jeremiah, let's take it specifically to when you're working with clients. How often do you ask that question? What is the ideal version of yourself?
Yeah, almost in every session, all the time, maybe 8 times during that session. That's the platform, that's the foundation we're working on. And Wes, you and I were talking about something before we got on the webinar earlier this morning about the idea of circumstances change. As we age, parental health declines. We may have children, child responsibilities. Things change in our lives that are unexpected. And so that ideal self may shift. And you and I were talking about that, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that too.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really important question, Jill. Thank you for posing it. We come back to that question every session, oftentimes multiple times a session. So the question may take different form. It may come up in the form of what does a fulfilling life for you look like? Are you living within your resonant self today? The question may take a lot of different shapes. The miracle question that Nathan referenced earlier is absolutely one of those questions. If you wake up tomorrow and all of your problems are solved, what does that look like? I think an important caveat to make within this is that when we're coaching with clients, we're always dealing with the future, right? We've said that the coaching is always inherently looking to the future, but the future itself, that timeline of what do we mean by the future, that changes from client to client, and it may change from conversation to conversation. So sometimes the future is next week, sometimes the future is in 6 months, and sometimes the future is in 10 years. And so knowing what type of future we're talking about, of what is the ideal version of yourself in this future, in this future, in this future, that definitely changes the landscape of the conversation. I would say one of the reasons that ideal version of yourself question is so powerful is I don't know that the ideal version of yourself actually does change. What we're really tapping into is we're really tapping into your personal vision statement, your personal mission statement, and your personal values. So let me show you some of the way that this actually plays out in a coaching relationship. So Jeremiah, if I'm coaching him in our first session, I'm saying, what's important to you? What do you value? And I usually ask the questions as plain as that. I'm not trying to hide anything from the coachee or be really cute with my questions. I'll just ask it really directly. What's the ideal version of yourself, Jeremiah? What do you value? What type of leader do you want to be? What do you want your leadership legacy to look like? And when I get that vision of him at the beginning, then I'm holding a mirror up to him throughout the rest of our sessions of saying, Jeremiah, you told me that you wanted to be the type of leader that was honest, that was courageous, and that took risks when appropriate. And it sounds like in the meeting that you had yesterday that you're describing, it sounds like you held back a little bit. It sounds like you weren't as honest as you would be. Were you living true to your leadership values in that moment? Were you showing up as your ideal version of yourself? And that's a series of questions. I mean, usually in a coaching context, I'm trying to ask just one question at a time, but I'm giving you those questions to get you a sense of how this comes into play. And for those of you who are leaders utilizing coaching in your leadership, it's really critical for you to be able to hold that mirror up to your employees and tell me, Jeremiah, this is what you told me your values were. This is what you told me your ideal version of yourself was. Are you living into that, or are you not living into that? And again, as your circumstances change, I don't know that your ideal version of yourself does change. I think the ideal version of yourself is how you show up for yourself and for others in a variety of circumstances. So it's almost values-based decision making is a little bit of what we're talking about here.
Wes, we've got time for one more question, and then I'll close this out for the day with the link. I'll go ahead and upload the link for our next session in April. It's the neuroscience of coaching. So there's the link for everybody to go ahead and register for that if you'd like. But we do have one more question. It's a great question. How do you coach people that are afraid to open up about what they really want or what they stand for? What's the difference? It sounds like, what's the difference with people that do open up easily? So it sounds like, what do you do with somebody that's pretty guarded? Maybe there's not, what I'm sensing, trust there, and somebody who maybe wears it more on the sleeve.
Yeah, well, I just spoke quite a bit, so I'll put that question back on you. Jeremiah, what do you do whenever you're working with somebody? It sounds like the question is really posing. You have people that are more comfortable opening up, and then people that maybe aren't as comfortable opening up. How do you coach those two different types of people?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And it's something as people, as managers, as bosses, as peers, we come across in our everyday life, right? Not just coaching. Again, coaching is built on trust. And so I don't want us to slip by and say, hey, we're just diving in and asking these questions in the first session. Sometimes a lot of these questions, you don't get down to the meat of it until the third or fourth session. And so the coaching has so much to do with the chemistry between the coach and the client. And so that's what we're working towards is, one, establishing trust. Hey, you can trust me. Hey, and then I'm asking you questions repeatedly in different ways. Hey, what do you really want? What do you stand for? Let's do a values exercise and really discover some values. There are some great models and great exercises that coaches use to get people talking. And I do that. They almost turn into working coaching sessions of, hey, let's write down some words to identify some of these emotions that we can tie to that future self. Wes, what else do you have?
Yeah, I think that's all great. I think it's a really important question. I think the likelihood that somebody actually knows the answer to that question coming into the first session is pretty slim. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's really reflective of the need for coaching, because we're not having these conversations very often of who do you want to be? And so we're living our lives in reactive mode instead of proactive mode. So to get your clients or working with your coachees, whether it's your clients or people that work for you, to get them into that headspace of actually thinking proactively about the future and what they're building towards is a difficult exercise. We're working different muscles that people aren't utilizing very often. I think one of the techniques that I try to use as a coach is obviously number one is just our ethical standards of confidentiality. We don't share anything that our clients share with us outside of the coaching session. We don't report back to the organization. There are executive coaching firms that do that. For us, we believe that decreases the effectiveness of coaching dramatically. So we uphold that client coach confidentiality to very extreme measures. It's very important to us. And then the second thing is I do see that a lot of times when we're coaching leaders are conditioned to, they've gotten to where they are in life by making good choices and by always having solutions to the answers. And so they want to be right. And that desire to be right creates some fixed mindsets where then they're afraid of being wrong or they're afraid of failing and they're afraid to take risks. And so one of the things that I tell my coachees is, hey, in coaching, we're just writing with a pencil right now. It's got an eraser on the end. Let's just map this out. Let's brainstorm. I know you probably don't have the exact answer to this question at this initial point in time, but let's just start dreaming together and brainstorming what could be possible. What could your future look like if you really felt that you had control to take hold of your future and that there were no limitations? So let's take money off the table. Let's take life circumstances off the table. And then let's just dream about the future. And getting them into that dream mindset and reiterating that we're writing with pencil right now, we can go back and renegotiate this at any point. If we get into our third session and you tell me, hey, what I told you in the first session, I've actually thought about that. And I actually think I would hate that life. I actually think that would make me a really miserable person. And I'm not really sure where that answer came from, but I don't agree with it anymore. Perfect. Let's go back and erase it. Now you're getting to tell me, what do you want? So constantly, we're renegotiating the terms of the relationship, renegotiating the goals that we're working on, renegotiating the vision, renegotiating the ideal self. All of that is always on the table. You have complete agency over your own life. You are in control. You are the CEO of your own life. So we're just writing in pencil, and at any point we can go back and erase it and change course. You're not stuck.
So what I hear is you're saying there are no boxes in coaching.
Yeah. No boxes, limitless possibility. And that's actually the number one rule of coaching, is that coaching needs to be inherently expansive and inherently looking at the possibilities of what if. So that idea of taking all of the constraints that usually keep us from dreaming in the first place, of, you know, the ideas of money and aging parents and young kids and all of these constraints that are very real in life that keep us from dreaming. Let's shoot towards possibilities first, and then we'll calibrate towards your existing reality and what's actually possible. But if we begin with the constraints and the limitations of what the present challenges you're facing today, you will never allow yourself to dream of what's possible. And that old adage that you probably had of the poster that was in your elementary school room is shoot for the stars. Even if you miss, you'll land amongst the moon. You know, it's silly, but that's what we're doing in coaching, is let's dream about what it looks like to be amongst the stars. And then even if the stars aren't available to us, maybe we'll get to the moon, and maybe you never would have left Earth otherwise. And so we want to dream for the best possible scenario, and then we'll calibrate for reality and limitations of what's actually possible.
That's great stuff, Wes. Well, this has been fun to do with you and Nathan. Very grateful that we got to pause during our day and just have a fun conversation. We would talk about this all day long if we could. But I know you all have other things to do, so we're going to come to a close here. But the link is right there in the chat box. We hope you go ahead and register for that. Please feel free to share that with your colleagues, with friends that you feel like would have a benefit and a heart for coaching their people. Again, Wes said something, what if? And so as you leave today, I hope you get to ask yourself, what if? And really start filling in the blanks for yourself. And hopefully, as we all continue to meet, that becomes clearer and clearer and clearer. And not only that, I hope you get to turn around and ask people that same question, what if? With that said, if you are interested in getting a coach, that's what we do. Strata Leadership is an executive coaching firm. We love what we do. We love doing this. We love doing leadership development through programs and experiences and all the above. So thank you again.
A team of about 15 certified coaches. So if you don't like Jeremiah or I, we'll probably be able to match you up with somebody who would be a good fit. So don't let that keep you from reaching out. And like Jeremiah said, this is a series of 8 webinars. They all build on top of one another. So they're crafted very intentionally to be a series. And so today was our first one. We look forward to having you at the remaining 7.
You all have a great day, and thank you again. Don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions about today's webinar.
Thank you very much. Bye, everyone.